42 years ago, a woman in the mountain town of Glenwood Springs, Colorado, vanished from her own driveway on a Thursday morning in early November, leaving behind an unlocked front door, a still-running engine, and a grocery list she had written out by hand the night before. Authorities at the time concluded there was no immediate evidence of foul play, and within 2 weeks the investigation had narrowed to almost nothing. Her family knew better. Her mother, a retired schoolteacher named Dolores, who would spend the rest of her long life waiting for an answer, told the local paper that her daughter had never gone anywhere without saying goodbye. Not once. Not in 31 years. Then, in the spring of 2024, a cold case detective in Garfield County submitted a single sample of biological evidence that had been sitting in a sealed evidence envelope since 1984 to a forensic genealogy lab in Texas. What came back changed everything. But to understand what was finally solved after 4 decades, you first have to understand who Karen Marie Ellison was. And to understand who she was, you have to go back to the Colorado she grew up in, a state that still felt, in 1983, like the frontier edge of something vast and unhurried. It was the kind of November that western Colorado does better than anywhere else, cold and clean, with the aspens already stripped bare and the smell of pine smoke drifting down from the ridgelines above the valley. Glenwood Springs sat at the confluence of the Colorado and Roaring Fork rivers, a town of about 7,000 people where everybody kept their doors unlocked, and the diner on Grand Avenue still had the same waitress it had hired in 1971. The high school football season was just ending. Christmas decorations were going up in storefront windows a little earlier than seemed polite. Life moved the way small mountain town life moves, slowly enough that you noticed when anything changed. Karen Ellison had grown up 6 miles down the valley in Carbondale, the second of 3 children born to Dale and Dolores Ellison, a rancher and a schoolteacher who had raised their family in a cedar-sided house on a dirt road they shared with 2 other families and roughly 100 head of cattle. She had been, by every account, one of those people who make a place feel like itself. She coached youth basketball at the recreation center on Monday evenings. She organized the church rummage sale every September. She kept a vegetable garden in the backyard and gave away more tomatoes than she ever ate herself. Neighbors remember the sound of her laugh, loud, unself-conscious, the kind that made other people start laughing before they even heard the joke. She had graduated from Colorado Mountain College with a degree in nursing and worked at Valley View Hospital, where she had been a pediatric nurse for 6 years. Her patients knew her as the one who brought stuffed animals from her own collection and left them on the bedside tables of children who were in for longer stays. Her coworkers knew her as the one who always remembered birthdays and never missed a going-away party. She was 31 years old that November. She had been talking to her mother about maybe getting a dog. Karen had been divorced for 2 years from a man named Gary, a separation that had been, by all accounts, quiet and without bitterness. She lived alone in a rented house on Pitkin Avenue, a small green house with a covered porch and a blue spruce in the front yard that the landlord had planted the year Kennedy was shot. She drove a 1979 Ford Bronco, dark brown, with a dent in the passenger door she kept meaning to have looked at. She had plans to visit her sister in Denver for Thanksgiving. She had already bought the cranberry sauce. On the morning of Wednesday, November 9th, 1983, Karen worked the early shift at Valley View, clocking out just after 2 in the afternoon. A coworker named Patrice Hines walked with her to the parking lot and watched her drive away. Karen waved from the window. It was the last time anyone who knew her would see her face. By the following morning, Karen had not shown up for her Thursday shift. This was not like her. The charge nurse paged the hospital's main line twice before calling Karen's apartment. No answer. She tried again at 9. Still nothing. By 10 o'clock she had called Karen's mother, Dolores, who drove the 6 miles from Carbondale in 16 minutes. The front door of the house on Pitkin Avenue was unlocked. Inside, everything was in its place. The coffee maker was off. The dishes were dry in the rack. On the kitchen table sat the grocery list Karen had written the night before. Milk, bread, butter, peanut butter, orange juice, a roll of paper towels. She had placed a pen on top of it, the way people do when they plan to come back to something. The television was off. The bedroom was undisturbed. Dolores stood in the middle of that kitchen for a long time before she called the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived within the hour. What they found in the driveway stopped them. Karen's Ford Bronco, sitting with the driver's door open and the engine running. The tank, when they checked it, was nearly empty. The engine had been running since sometime the previous afternoon, burning through almost a full tank of gas while the house sat empty and quiet. There was no sign of a struggle in or around the vehicle. No purse. No keys visible. The grocery list inside the house. The running engine outside. Deputies canvassed the street. A neighbor 2 houses down, a retired electrician named Harold Bauer, said he thought he had heard a car door close around 5:30 the previous evening, maybe a little later. He had not looked out the window. He had assumed it was Karen coming home. Garfield County Undersheriff Dale Prouty opened a formal missing persons investigation on the morning of November 10th. He assigned 2 deputies to canvass the neighborhood and surrounding area. Search teams walked the riverbank and the wooded corridors above town. The Bronco was impounded and processed. A partial handprint, not matching Karen's, was lifted from the exterior of the driver's door. Within 10 days, a person of interest had emerged. A man named Richard Wayne Coulter, 38 years old, who had worked as a maintenance contractor at Valley View Hospital during the summer and fall of 1983. Multiple co-workers reported that Coulter had made comments about Karen that had made them uncomfortable. Not specific enough to report at the time, but the kind of comments that women remember. He had asked the charge nurse twice about Karen's schedule. One co-worker said he had seen Coulter sitting in his truck in the hospital parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, watching the employee exit. Undersheriff Prouty brought Coulter in for questioning on November 18th. Coulter was cooperative, calm, and spoke easily. He said he had not seen Karen Ellison since his last day at the hospital in October. He had an alibi for the afternoon of November 9th. He said he had been at a friend's house in Basalt, helping install a water heater. The friend confirmed it. Prouty let him go. Coulter was interviewed a second time in January of 1984, after investigators learned that the alibi witness, the friend in Basalt, had been Coulter's brother-in-law. The second interview was recorded. Coulter again denied any knowledge of Karen's whereabouts. His demeanor, both times, was described by investigators as remarkably steady. No charges were filed. The investigation continued without him at its center. In March of 1984, a seasonal worker clearing brush along the Roaring Fork River near Carbondale found a woman's shoe, a brown leather clog, size 7. Karen's sister identified it as consistent with a pair Karen owned. Nothing else was recovered in the surrounding area. The shoe was logged into evidence, and the case file was stamped with a date. Then, the months began to move. By 1990, Karen Ellison had been missing for 7 years. The case had never officially closed, but in practical terms it had become what cold case investigators call a dormant file, a folder in a cabinet that nobody was actively working. Undersheriff Prouty had retired in 1988. His replacement had a different caseload and different priorities. The valley continued to grow, as valleys do. New families moved in, old ones scattered. The green house on Pitkin Avenue was repainted yellow and rented to a young couple who had never heard of Karen Ellison. Dolores drove to the sheriff's office every year on the anniversary of her daughter's disappearance and asked the same question. She never raised her voice. She brought the same manila folder of notes she had been adding to since 1984. The deputies who received her were always polite. None of them had any news. By 1997, Karen would have been 45 years old. Her nephew, her sister's son, graduated from high school that spring. Dolores attended the ceremony and sat in the bleachers holding a photograph in her purse, the way she always did at family events. It was a school portrait from Karen's senior year of high school, laminated at some point in the 1990s, and worn smooth at the edges from being carried. Richard Wayne Coulter, in the years after his 2 interviews, had moved to Grand Junction. He married. He had 2 stepchildren. He worked as a property manager for a commercial real estate firm and coached a youth baseball team for several seasons in the mid-90s. People who knew him in Grand Junction described him as a quiet man, dependable, the kind of neighbor who shoveled your walk without being asked. Nobody who knew him there knew his name had ever appeared in a missing persons file. The shoe sat in an evidence locker at the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. The handprint from the Bronco door sat in an envelope beside it. The DNA technology that would eventually matter did not yet exist in a form that could help Karen Ellison. But it was coming. Dolores Ellison died in 2018, at the age of 84, without an answer. Her obituary mentioned that she was survived by 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and that she had taught 4th grade in the Carbondale School District for 31 years. It did not mention the folder she had kept for 35 years, or the anniversaries she had never missed. Karen's sister, Patricia, kept the folder. The case had been cold for 40 years when a detective named Sergeant Aaron Weiss, assigned to the Garfield County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit, pulled the Ellison file in the autumn of 2023 as part of a systematic review of unsolved disappearances from the 1980s. He had been doing this kind of work for 11 years. He opened the folder and read the original interview notes from 1983. He read the alibi. He noted the name Richard Wayne Coulter and the fact that the alibi witness had been a family member. He pulled the evidence log and confirmed that the biological sample, the partial handprint from the Bronco door, preserved on a card in a sealed envelope since 1984, was still intact. Every case like this, he knew, turned on one thing: whether anyone had saved anything. Someone had. If you've been watching along and you want to know how this ends, so does Karen's family. Before we get there, I want to ask you for one thing. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering stories like Karen's, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every one. Now let's get back to Glenwood Springs. On a morning in March of 2024, Sergeant Weiss received a secure notification from Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based forensic genealogy firm that specializes in what the industry calls phenotypic analysis and investigative genetic genealogy, a process that works by uploading crime scene DNA to public ancestry databases, the same websites where ordinary people trace their family trees, and then following the genetic threads backward until they converge on an unknown contributor. The partial handprint from Karen Ellison's Ford Bronco had yielded enough viable DNA for the process. It had found a family. Weiss read the report twice. Then he made a phone call to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The genealogical match pointed to a man in Mesa County, Grand Junction, Cross-referencing the name against the original case file took Weiss less than 3 minutes. Richard Wayne Coulter. Interviewed twice, never charged. Now 78 years old, still living in the same city he had moved to in 1986. Investigators from the Garfield County Sheriff's Office and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation drove to Grand Junction on a Tuesday morning in late April. They did not call ahead. Coulter answered his own front door. He was arrested on the steps of the house he had lived in for 19 years, in the neighborhood where his stepchildren had grown up, a block from the park where he had coached baseball for 3 seasons in the 1990s. He made no statement. He did not resist. He looked, according to one of the arresting deputies, like a man who had been waiting for something for a very long time. The community's reaction when the arrest was announced the following morning split along a familiar fault line. In Glenwood Springs and Carbondale, where Karen's name had never entirely faded, the response was something close to relief mixed with grief. Relief that a name had finally been attached to what happened. Grief that it had taken 4 decades to do it. In Grand Junction, where Coulter had built his second life, the response was disbelief. Neighbors who had borrowed his tools and invited him to their backyard barbecues said the same things, again and again. He was quiet. He was dependable. He was the last person anyone would have suspected. That phrase, the last person anyone would have suspected, had been used about Richard Wayne Coulter twice before, in interview notes from November 1983 and January 1984. It had been used to explain why he was not charged. It was now the thing people were struggling to understand. Coulter was charged in May of 2024 with first-degree murder in the death of Karen Marie Ellison. Karen's remains have not been found. Prosecutors have indicated they intend to seek a conviction on circumstantial and forensic evidence, anchored by the DNA from the handprint on the Bronco door. As of the time this script was written, Coulter had pleaded not guilty. The case is proceeding through the Garfield County District Court. Patricia Ellison, Karen's sister, who has kept their mother's folder for 6 years, issued a short statement through the sheriff's office. She said that her mother had always known. She said that Karen deserved to have her name spoken out loud again. She said she was grateful for the people who had never stopped caring about the case, even when the years made caring feel like shouting into silence. Karen Ellison was 31 years old in November of 1983. She left stuffed animals on the bedside tables of sick children. She grew tomatoes she gave away and laughed loud enough that it made the people around her start laughing before they knew why. She had a grocery list on her kitchen table and a Bronco in the driveway and plans to drive to Denver for Thanksgiving. She had a dog she was thinking about getting. She had a life that belonged entirely to her, and it was taken from her on a cold Thursday afternoon in western Colorado by a man who had spent 4 decades building a quiet second life in the space her disappearance left behind. The DNA from a handprint, pressed against a car door in November of 1983 and sealed in an envelope for 40 years, finally said his name. There is something particular about cases like this one, not just the length of time, but the gap between what the family knew and what the system could prove. Dolores Ellison drove to the sheriff's office every year for 35 years. She brought her notes. She asked her question. She went home without an answer. The technology that eventually answered her question existed in some form for the last several years of her life. She died without knowing it would come. Patricia has the folder now. What does it mean that the tools to solve Karen's case existed years before her mother died, but the case wasn't submitted for genetic genealogy analysis until 2023. How many other families are sitting in that same space? The answer technically within reach, the submission not yet made. And if you knew there was a partial handprint in an evidence envelope in your county's evidence locker from an unsolved case from the 1980s, what would you want done with it? Justice found Karen Ellison after 42 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists, because truth, however late it arrives, still matters. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. And if you want more solved cold cases, every one we've covered is in the description below. Thank you for watching.